NATO is a war organization. If there was peace with Putin, then why do we need them?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, Warsaw Pact collapsed. Why not them?
Right.
So they have to keep saying, "Oh, Putin wants to invade Europe."
Our neighbor's choice.
Well, I'm here today with a legend in the investment and forecast business, someone who people look to for insights as to what in the world is going on with the economic situation that we're in. He's highly recommended. Martin Armstrong joins me. How you doing, sir?
Oh, very good. Interesting times we live in.
Yeah, they are. And I've been having so many folks always recommending your work, and I've seen it over the years. But I wanted to get directly be able to speak with you. Your website's armstrongeconomics.com, and you cover the intersection of geopolitics, global markets, and economic confidence. And you've got a unique angle on a lot of these things. So, where are you most interested in your work right now? You cover so many things, but what's the thing that's got your eye focused on the most?
Well, it is mostly geopolitical.
Mhm.
You know, when I started in this business, we were really doing currency back in the 70s. And because they didn't teach anything about a floating exchange rate in school or anything of that nature,
Yeah.
so it was pretty much learn, on the street, really.
Yeah.
Um, and So we got into forecasting currencies, and that ended up dragging me into all sorts of different governments around the world, because then currency was the I would say the check and balance sometimes against these governments. And so I would get dragged into all these different things that Margaret Thatcher. It's very, very interesting. I mean, if you ever asked me in high school, would you ever be doing this? I would have said you were crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but so it, we had a client, one of the big banks in Lebanon, and they found a ledger with all the Lebanese pound and written down back into the 19th century, and they asked if we could create a model on it. And I said, sure. We stuck it in, and out came it said the country was going to fall apart in 8 days.
Wow.
And I thought there was something wrong with the data. I called the client, and they obviously knew that was happening. And they just came to me really for the timing. And he very calmly said, well, what currency would you recommend? I said, well, it says the Swiss franc. And 8 days later, the Civil War began. I saw the same thing with the Iraq-Iran war. I had a client there too, called up and said, war is going to start tomorrow. What do you think gold's going to do? And then Russia. I mean, over the years, what I found is that somebody always knows in advance. And so like the SEC used our stuff after 9/11, looking for who bought puts on airlines a few days in advance, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's dragged me into from just economics into the geopolitical world as well.
Yeah.
I had no real didn't realize, I would say, that um, the computer was being able to forecast wars and things of this nature, because somebody always does know, and the money starts moving in advance. And even like the Hamas attack in Israel, the defense stock started rising about 7 days in advance. So somebody always knows something.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
And then your
I guess
job is to try to find out who that person is before it happens, right? See what they know, right?
well, we try to warn our clients, hey, this is, be careful. This is what's coming over here. Um, Look, it's like Pelosi. Her track record's better than Warren Buffett.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, so I mean, insider information has always been an issue in Congress.
yeah.
They've always exempted themselves.
Somebody
But
knew
this is
something. Somebody knew something about the Trump attempt on his life because they were shorting that Truth Social stock and his Trump
yeah.
products. They were really somebody did something real drastic there, and then I
Well,
thought that
you
was
had
interesting.
him actually. He was denied sniper protection until that event.
Yeah,
Why?
yeah,
It's but actually, I was in Berlin, and our computer had forecast that Trump would win big time.
yeah,
And they were very anti-Trump. They said, "Oh, come on, really?" I said, "I'm telling you, I'm sorry. I don't care what your newspapers over here say. Trump's going to win." I said, "But I think personally, knowing these neocons, like I said, I've been to dinner with some of these people. I can't imagine them just laying back." I said, "I think they'll try and assassinate him." And then they thought I was really into conspiracy. And then after
yeah,
that happened, they go, "Holy shit, you really know these people, don't you?" I said, "Look, I
yeah,
just know them.
yeah,
They spent their whole life on this agenda.
yeah,
I can't see them just like quietly, riding off into the sunset.
yeah,
I mean, they lost with trying to keep Trump out. But I mean, look, you even had Dick Armey coming out. I mean, uh, you had a whole bunch of different people. Cheney come out and say that endorsing Camilla. Why?
yeah,
Because they could manipulate her into invading Russia or anything.
yeah,
But this is the way they function. Uh, they spent their whole life just hating Russia, and you see it in the Middle East. It's they're into these regime changes, and I mean that's what I got all caught up in back in 2000. But they were trying to regime change in Russia. I mean, this is what they were doing in the Middle East. I mean, look, they took out just about every head. Trump told them, "Don't take out the Ayatollah." What are you, crazy? I mean, war can be different reasons. Conquest, ethnic differences, but the worst of all is religion. When you put one person's God against another,
yeah,
there's no real compromise then.
yeah,
And my concern, and I was warning Washington, was that if you took out the Ayatollah, about 30% of the population in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, etc., they're all, they're Shiite.
right,
So it would be kind of like a Protestant assassinating the Pope.
right,
You create the Protestant Reformation all over again.
yeah,
Um, there are just certain things you can't do.
right,
And religion is not one that is negotiable.
yeah,
If it's a border, all right, I'll give you this piece, you give me that piece, but when you get into religion, that's a whole different animal.
right,
And so I'm not very optimistic that this will ever be resolved in the Middle East. I don't
yeah,
see it possible, any way,
yeah.
shape, or form.
Do you think that 12-day war is just the beginning of a long, prolonged war with Iran and Israel and America?
Yes, a lot of people may not know, but Bibi went to school in Philadelphia, and he hung out with Bill Kristol and his family, Irving, who started the whole neocon stuff. And so he's a diehard, neocon. And that's why Trump had to tell him, "No, you don't take out the Ayatollah." They just, they're very myopic in their views. mean, I argued with Bill Kristol back in the 90s on this. And he was back then saying that if we took out Saddam Hussein, Assad out of Syria, and Gaddafi, we'll bring peace to the Middle East. I said, you're out of your mind. I mean, it's, but this is the problem. People tend to often judge others by themselves. I think, oh, we'll bring democracy to the Middle East. They haven't had that. Okay, it's not compatible with Islam to begin with. Equal rights and all this sort of stuff. There are differences, and so I don't see that as a possible long-term solution. I just don't. It's look. I mean, just look at Ireland. It's still divided between the Protestants and the Catholics, North versus South. These. You go to England, they still call Catholics papes. Yeah. And that's from the Civil War, 1649.
Yeah.
So these things don't disappear. Ukraine, they just, it's ethnic. They just hate Russians, period.
Yeah.
I don't think they can coexist. We had 2 employees in Ukraine, and one was from the Russian side, one was from Kiev, and the 2 of them wouldn't even talk to each other.
Now when I look at some of the folks that I talk to, like Tom Luongo, he's always telling me that it's about SOFR and the LIBOR systems. It's about the city of London trying to keep its tentacles, and the European old families trying to keep their tentacles controlling the world capital and being able to specifically use America as a kind of bludgeon for war at our expense and their profit. And so all of what we're seeing, it's kind of fitting with what you're saying, that the financial precedes the political. But yet there are these ethnic and religious themes that I guess motivate the masses to participate, right? That's kind of the selling point for the masses. But underneath that is there's a financial calculation that's preceding those narratives, right?
Well, they stimulate it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at Ukraine, basically we created that war.
Yeah.
You had Victoria Nuland over there handing out sandwiches in Maidan. You had John McCain on the stage. Overthrow your government. We're behind you. All this stuff. And as soon as they did that, they installed an interim government, unelected, and that's the government that started the Civil War and attacked the Donbass. Mm-hmm. And so those ethnic differences were there.
Yeah.
And then they exploit them.
Yeah.
So the people out there fighting aren't necessarily doing it for money in London or something like that. But, the people behind it to instigate things are motivated by, other factors. I mean, these neocons, my opinion is this, that they spent their whole life hating Russians.
Yeah.
Hiding underneath desks in the 1950s and air raid drills and stuff, and when, all right, Khrushchev said, we will bury you. That was a philosophical difference between communism versus capitalism. All right. But so they got their backs up, and it was all about, overthrowing communism, and we'll bring democracy to the world.
Right.
So they took the opposite position of Khrushchev, and I think the problem is that communism is just not sustainable economically.
Right.
And so it collapsed, and I think that they're just got pissed off that they didn't get to shoot anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, why are they against Russia? At least before it was communist.
Right.
All
What's,
right, they're not
yeah.
communists anymore.
Yeah. What's the ideological issue there? Uh-huh.
I think it just has devolved down to this ethnic difference.
Yeah.
Because
It,
there is no more, communist, we will bury you sort of thing.
right.
And even with China, um, they go, oh well, that's Communist Party. I said they're not communist, right? Communist. Do you understand what that means? The government owns everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I said you have to understand the Asian mentality. All right, they didn't change the name of the party, but everybody owns their houses and cars and whatever now. I said if they changed the name of the party, they would have to take down Mao's picture from the Forbidden City and admit he was wrong.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a loss of face type thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, they're no more communist than Trump. You know,
Yeah.
But they didn't change the name, and that confuses a lot. Oh, the Communist Party. Well, do you understand what communism actually is?
Yeah.
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 It's one step further than socialism. The government owns everything. Um, but that's the Asian culture. It's a loss of face to have to admit you were wrong, which is what they would have to do, and they'd have to take Mao's picture down off the Forbidden Wall, or
Yeah.
Forbidden City.
Yeah. When a lot of folks are talking about how these global elites are planning for a global catastrophe. We hear about Agenda 2030 and mass depopulation, whatever. Does your forecast work get into those topics? Have you researched that? Some people say there'll be a geological event, some kind of a catastrophe that the elites are aware of, and they're keeping it to their chest so they don't create panic. And then other people say, no, it's nothing to do with a geological event or global warming. It's just an attempt to cull the population so they can get to their Georgia Guidestones. That's a long way from where we are population wise. Any thoughts on that?
Um, well, we put everything into our computer, plagues, things of this nature, and geopolitical, as well as geographical information. And what the computer has projected is, I mean, global warming is just, it's just propaganda. And we are heading more towards a global cooling period. And that is much more dangerous. Most of your plagues correlate to cooling periods because what happens is crops fail, malnutrition takes place, that makes people more susceptible to disease. Like there was a major famine, they call it the Great Famine of 1314 to 15, and that sets the stage for economic problems, since the economy was probably 75% agrarian to begin with. Then you end up with plagues, the Black Plague, etc.
Yeah.
But the real problem we have is geological in the sense that the current in the Atlantic is starting to shift. You are seeing a lot more activity around the Ring of Fire. Those are the real dangers. You can pick up a book basically called the year without a summer. I think it was 1816 when Krakatoa went up. It was snowing in New York City in July. It throws so much ash up into the atmosphere, it blocks the sun.
Wow.
So you end up with these, drastic cooling periods. And this has been throughout history. It's not man-made. This is all propaganda. I mean, the first clean Air Act was 561 AD in Byzantium.
Wow.
You know, so it's always the same stories over and over and over again.
Yeah.
There was a major volcanic eruption around 537, and the historian said didn't see the sun for a long time. Crops failed, disease happens. So this is pretty standard throughout history.
Yeah.
And our greatest threat, I would say, at this stage in the game is that you have an awful lot of volcanoes kicking off around the ring of fire. And you get a couple big ones going on, and then you get the crop failures.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our computer's basically projecting that we'll probably see a plague type thing, but that's like around 1340s. I mean, around 2040. So it gets to be. I mean, there's a cycle to just about everything.
Yeah.
I mean, they put an instrument on your head and you got brain waves.
Yeah.
If you don't have a brain wave, you don't have a cycle going on in your head, you're dead.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's pretty much it.
What about the magnetic pole shift? People are talking about that. That's popular on YouTube and everything. Have you looked into that we're going to experience a catastrophic pole shift?
I was given the data by one of the universities on it. We put it in the computer. It's basically about a 720,000 year cycle.
Yeah.
I mean, we are getting, heading towards that, but is that another, 200 years, or is it, 2 years?
Yeah.
When you're dealing with 720,000 year cycles, you can be off just a little bit, and you're talking about 100 years, but all these things, we are definitely going through Earth changes at this stage in the game, and the Earth just gets more active.
Yeah.
We did correlations on the sun beats like your heart. There's solar maximum and minimum.
Yeah.
But when you go into solar minimum, apparently you get more gamma rays, and gamma rays can penetrate the Earth more. And some people theorize that is what stimulates, volcanic activity and earthquakes.
Yeah.
The gamma rays penetrate the Earth more.
Yeah.
I mean, these are all very interesting, theories.
Yeah.
But we're definitely going into more of a period of extreme type weather, going into 2032, pretty much.
Yeah. So maybe we got to rethink Florida at some point.
Well, I moved from New Jersey to come down to Florida, so try to get closer to global warming.
Yeah. 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 It's we're glad to have you here. It's one of those things that people will always have these predictions at the end of this or that's coming, but we keep trudging along, And I remember during the housing market collapse in 2008 that there was a lot of the folks that I had listened to at the time. Dr. Doom, I remember him, and I talked to Peter Schiff a lot, and Jim Rogers, and all those guys were saying, that the real money is to invest in being a farmer. I remember Jim Rogers had a famous line that the farmers will be driving Lamborghinis before this all sorts out. And that hasn't really happened yet. Most of the farmers I know still have beat up pickup trucks.
Pretty much, yes.
So where do you think how does that shake out in terms of the local American, situation? Do you think that we're about to potentially enter a big boom of wealth generation like Trump wants and is telling people he's trying to set up, or do you think we're past that from really taking off?
Interesting theory he has, but it's not going to work the way he anticipates.
Yeah.
It is, what our computer does is tracks all the capital flows. And from being an international hedge fund manager in the 80s, I was back in Geneva. That was where all the OPEC money was being managed, etc. And I began to see it move from there to Japan, um, and then by Japan, that bubble peaks out in 89, and oh, excuse me. Then all the capital moves to Southeast Asia. That peaks out by 94. Then it's like, oh, the euro is coming. Let's go over there, and it all runs to Europe for 1998. This is the way capital really works. And if we look honestly, you'll see that the U.S. was virtually bankrupt in 1896. That's when J.P. Morgan had to lend $100 million in gold to bail out the Treasury. And it was World War I and II that made the United States the financial capital. Before then, it was Britain. You can go on eBay and buy, Chinese bonds issued in British pounds, and so what our computer is showing is that as all this war activity is heating up, and Europe really needs war pretty desperately at this stage in the game, because it's the structure of the euro is a complete mess. It's a failure, and so governments will do whatever they have to retain power, and that's why they've been stabbing Trump in the back on any peace deal with Putin, whatever. I mean, Putin has countlessly came out offering peace. They don't want war, but Europe needs war. Without war, they're going to collapse themselves, and so it's better that they can blame somebody else like Putin rather than have all the farmers with their pitchforks storming the parliament.
Yeah.
And so what our computer is showing, even from this August onward, is that the escalation in war is taking place. And so what we're really looking at is the capital flows will be coming to the United States. When they were forming the euro, they came to me. So I met with the commission and all that back in 98. And I explained how we create a currency. You had to consolidate the debt of all the member states to create a national debt, and then it could compete against the dollar. And at the time, Hermann Kohl was the chancellor of Germany, and he didn't allow the German people to vote. And he took Germany in basically unilaterally. And he knew the German people would be object against any debt consolidation. So each member state retained their own debt. And that's why the euro's never been able to compete with the dollar. As a fund manager, I can pick up the phone and say, buy me 10 billion of U.S. treasuries. I can't do that with Europe. I still have to make the same decision. Do I want Germany? Do I want France? Do I want Italy? So he didn't really accomplish anything. He eliminated the individual currencies, but the volatility just moved to the bond markets.
Yeah.
So this is the problem they have. And we saw it back in 2010 when Greece got into trouble. The capital immediately goes, oh, who's next? Oh, Spain, Here you have one EU state gets in trouble, and it will create a contagion that affects everybody. Whereas in the United States, if California went bust, they're going to look at other states. They're not going to look at the feds.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is why I warned them. I said, yours going to fail. This is not, not the way you're going to do it. But, that was Hermann Kohl's demands. and he didn't allow the German people to vote. And he admitted before he died, he acted like a dictator. And he said that if he allowed the German people to vote to join the euro, he would have lost 7-3.
Yeah.
So that's the problem of Europe. If yeah, it's very vulnerable, and because they didn't consolidate the debt, it's everybody pays different interest rates.
Yeah.
It's the same thing in the States. We got 50 states, we got a single currency, but they pay different interest rates according to their credit rating.
Yeah.
So that becomes the problem that we're facing with Europe. And this is why they need war, because they know it's kind of coming to an end. And it's like I've said on other podcasts, I've seen the internal memos, like from NATO. Whenever you create an agency, they will fight tooth and nail to the end to keep their money coming.
Yeah.
And the memos I saw from concerning NATO was like, how do we remain relevant? NATO is a war organization. If there was peace with Putin, then why do we need them?
Yeah.
Warsaw Pact collapsed. Why not them?
Right.
So they have to keep saying, "Oh, Putin wants to invade Europe," as if he's Khrushchev. And he's been there since 1999. He has no interest in invading Europe. What are you going to get out of it? There's nothing there of any value. Like Japan invaded Manchuria, it was to get natural resources and energy.
Yeah.
All right. Europe has to get its energy from Russia.
Right.
Gold, they don't have that. So what are you going to get out of it? You're going to invade, okay, fine. The French are going to say, okay, you're going to pay our pensions now. That's about it.
Yeah.
You're going to get civil unrest. It's a mess. It's war. It's not. It depends upon what it's for. I mean, like you say, Alexander the Great was conquest, and the troops shared in the spoils. He couldn't say, well, let's go get this, we're going to go attack this country. What are we going to get out of it? Oh, nothing. They're going, really? You're on your own.
Yeah.
So
that was kind of Trump's mentality when he was assessing Iraq and all that. He said, why don't we get the oil for ourselves? Instead the oil went to Israel or other places like that, but it wasn't, Syria, we did all that in Syria, that we didn't get anything out of that. We did Afghanistan. We didn't get anything out of that. Nothing. The American worker is poor and depleted. Yeah. Yeah.
We get, $3 trillion for Iraq. For what? For what purpose?
Yeah.
This is these neocons.
Yeah.
And they don't give two shits about the country, the people. They just have to win as if this is a football game. We got to defeat Russia.
Yeah.
Why? Well, just because they're Russians. All right. You'll notice that there's Europe was all angry at Trump because the neocons, what they do, and rule number one, never speak to your opponent, because then that might lead to peace.
Yeah.
So every European leader refuses to speak to Putin because that's what they're told. All right, no, don't talk. Trump actually spoke to Putin. It's like they were all livid about that. Oh my God, he's talking to a dictator or whatever. Well, what's your solution? We just pushed all the buttons?
Yeah.
You're obviously not interested in peace. You don't care about your people. The first obligation of a government should be to avoid war, not create it. But this is the big difference. And I mean, I had actually gone to Mar-a-Lago for dinner when Trump was president the first time, back in March of 2020, and he did impress me then. He said he wanted to pull the troops out of Afghanistan, but the reason was that he said he was tired of writing letters to their parents that your son died for God and country. And he said, what are we doing there? What difference are we going to make? They've been fighting over borders for 1,000 years. And I've met many heads of state over the years, and I would say my assessment is this, that they're told never to think about the people who die on the battlefield. That's just collateral damage.
Yeah.
We have to win.
Yeah.
Whereas Trump, not being a politician, wasn't raised that way. And he actually thought about the people that died on the battlefield. So I think that's why they were all, the neocons were against him. I mean, it's a philosophical difference. They can look at themselves, kill 100,000 people and go out to dinner and celebrate with champagne. It's they really don't care about the country or the people. If you look at our national debt, the vast majority of it is all because of them.
Yeah.
It's wars. We never pay off anything. We're still paying interest on World War One. And we spent $3 trillion just on Iraq.
Yeah.
What do we get out of this? Nothing.
Do you see
the people get debts. We pay more taxes. Oh, we got to raise taxes because of the deficit. We get screwed every which way from Sunday with these people.
Do you see folks like Jerome Powell and Jamie Dimon, these people indicating that they want to put America first and financially and start organizing, efforts and financial considerations more for the American people for the first time in a long time? Or is that?
Yeah. I think Powell actually does understand things a little bit better than Trump credits him.
Yeah.
But I think that it's and Jamie Dimon, at least I was kind of surprised, but at Davos he stood up and he says Trump was right. We should have got out of NATO.
Yeah.
Rather than the typical nonsense that we hear, I think they're just indoctrinated by these neocons, as most of your heads of state in Europe are. My sources in France, they call Macron the petite Napoleon.
Yeah.
But this is pretty much it. It's everywhere you go, it's war, war, war. Merz in Germany, Starmer in Britain. But we're getting to the point where the confidence in government is starting to crack. I mean, there's going to be a no confidence vote on Ursula, at least tomorrow. She'll probably win, but there's at least a censure report where she might lose that. I mean, she doesn't belong there. She's never won an election. She came there because she was from the board of Schwab's WEF. That was it. And he was running around sticking his board members in everything. The head of the IMF, the World Bank, the ECB. I mean, that's part of the rumor that's running around that Christine Lagarde will be maybe the ultimate head of the WEF. Leave the central bank and go over there. It's but these people all have the same agenda. It is an elitist agenda, which is very, it's all based upon communism, really. And this whole idea of that started with Marx. What at the root of it is that government has the power to control the economy. Keynes adopted the same thing. If we lower rates or raise rates, we can we can manipulate the economy to our objectives. So it's always about them manipulating us. And it's very arrogant because it assumes that they actually know what they're doing, and when they don't.
Yeah.
And you know, this is the real problem. I mean, you had, you know, a lot of it. You know, you take the tariff issue. All right. You had all these people saying, "Oh, Trump with his tariffs is going to cause a Great Depression, inflation, blah blah blah." All right. Where did they get that from? The 1932 presidential election. The tariffs were imposed by, you know, to protect farmers. It was Smoot-Hawley. They were two Republicans. And the tariffs came in basically the summer of 1930. The crash had already begun. So in 1932, for the presidential election, they tried blaming the Great Depression on those two Republicans and their tariffs. It had nothing to do with it. What they didn't want to talk about was that you can read Herbert Hoover's memoirs. I suggest read 1931. All of Europe basically defaulted on its debt. So did Canada. And that's what wiped out 9,000 banks. When you wipe out the debt market, the amount of money in debt is on average 10 to 1 to equity.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you can take the stock market down 50%. It doesn't create depression. Not everybody's involved in it. You take the bond market down, what have you done? You've wiped out pension funds, bank reserves, all of this. It's much more deeper. And I mean, that's why even the 2007 to 2009 Great Recession was far worse because it involved all this, you know, bad debt. It wasn't the stock market that caused the debt to go down. It was the debt markets.
Yeah.
So you know, that's what we have to pay attention to. This is the real thing that's coming to a head. I know, you know, people say, "Oh, the debt, the dollar's going to crash." Very nice. You know, that's all pretty much hyped up stuff as well. The dollar will be the last thing to fall.
Yeah.
They don't understand what even makes the U.S. economy the biggest. It's the fact that we have a consumer-based economy. So Japan had to sell its Toyotas to Americans. Germany had to sell its BMWs. That's how they rose from the ashes of World War II. All right. If you look at an honest comparison, all the stocks on the New York Stock Exchange, the capitalization of that one exchange is worth more than all of the exchanges of Europe combined. Out of every dollar a consumer spends globally, Americans are 25%. Europe basically is $1.29 out of 10. That's a bit. That's about it. It's why China is trying to copy the United States, not Europe. Europe's a basket case, basically. China's trying to rebuild its Silk Road, consumer-based economy. They understand what made America great.
And we're trying to copy them by making stuff. We want to produce stuff. So how does that going to shake out? Do we both make? Is it possible that China and America could both make and consume stuff and be okay?
Yeah, because everybody has their own different expertise.
Yeah.
But the fact that we don't manufacture, people hype that up. Most of it was caused by currency. I mean, I've advised many multinational companies. And you don't move a plant because, oh, gee, I'll get to pay this guy $2 an hour less than this guy. That's not the issue. The issue is taxation. And I've testified before House Ways and Means Committee on this. It's
was that Ron Paul's committee?
No, he wasn't there at the time. It was Bill Archer.
Okay.
And what you're talking about is they keep saying, oh, tax the rich, the corporations. I basically restructured corporates. I was sticking them, if they needed skilled labor, I was putting them in Britain. And I happen to have known Margaret Thatcher's personal advisor, Sir Alan Walters. And she had heard this rumor that there's this guy sending companies to Britain. And he goes, yeah, that's Marty. She's, for real? You know him? He said, yes. Yeah. So she wanted to meet me. I explained to her, I said, look, the reason I put nobody in Germany was the social cost on top of what an employee gets was 40% higher. All these people are saying, oh, raise the taxes on corporations. Fine. Then they can't, give raises and things of this nature to the very staff that they have. All right. And, from the management side, you have to look at the total cost. So between Britain and Germany at that time, I showed Maggie that if I paid the employee the very same price that he saw taking home, the cost was 40% higher in Germany versus Britain. So I tell them, you got to go to Britain. All right. The employee didn't see any difference.
Right.
So you have to look at it from, you're not going to move because one's at 2% or $2 cheaper an hour than this one. You're looking at the total cost, etc. So many companies have their headquarters in Hong Kong. Why? Because it's 15% corporate tax rate.
Wow.
Why should I be in one place that I got to pay 40% when I can get 15% over there?
Yeah.
You see it, domestically, people moving from the blue states to the red states. The blue states got so crazy with the lockdowns, and so many stores went out of business, even on Fifth Avenue in New York. So, I mean, they don't look at things practically. I was in Germany. If you were on the train and you're running through Berlin, they go, oh, we're coming into Berlin. You got to put your mask on. Then when the train leaves Berlin, okay, you can take it off again. It's just because the mayor there, oh, mask, we have to protect people. That's his little fiefdom. That's do they really work? Did they do anything? No. But
I think a lot of those guys are just psychopaths that like to control people. If they can make you wear a pink shirt, they will. Whatever they can do to just control. They get off on that. You've been around those guys more than I do, so you'll know. You can tell me better than I can. But it seems like a lot of those guys are just control freaks. They get a trip off of controlling people and power. Is power the biggest motivator, or is it money? What have you seen in your experience?
No, it seems to be power. I think Klaus Schwab was definitely more of a control freak.
Is he a puppet, or is he really is he a really power player? I mean, how does that work? I always think like George Soros, he's a cutout for other people that kind of use him as a boogeyman, but he's got, he's not really, he's kind of being used, right? I mean, he makes his decisions, but he's not really the power behind the power there, is he?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I know Klaus. Klaus was an academic, and he did have a bust of Lenin on the shelf in his office. So when he was saying, you own nothing and be happy, that's pretty typical for these academics. They're all like, perfect world, all this kind of nonsense. They don't understand human nature or actually how it even functions. I mean, even Keynes, before he died, he spent his whole life against Adam Smith. And before he died, he said that he was wrong. And he hoped that, Adam Smith's invisible hand would save Britain.
Yeah.
They always want to be control freaks. They think they can control things.
Yeah. That's popular right now with the Republican Party, with Trump's Republican Party. They're trying to get rid of Thomas Massey and Rand Paul and repudiate a lot of the legacy of folks like Ron Paul because they believe in control economics, will dictate to you what you can do, and that's becoming popular on the right again. Yeah.
Yes, no, unfortunately this is the way it goes. It's they think that they can enforce their agenda. Mm-hmm. And I don't care if it's left or right. It always ends up being the same pretty much nonsense. Mm-hmm. What makes the economy function is freedom. And that's what brought down communism. You weren't free to, if I made this, that would be, really good and I could make a lot of money. Once you would remove that curiosity, people didn't create things.
Yeah.
That was Nixon's famous kitchen debate with Khrushchev in 1959. He said, see all these things, dishwasher, stuff like that, wasn't created by government. Somebody came up with an idea.
Yeah.
And that's what's so critical. You cannot mess with the human nature. Mm-hmm. We're always going to do the same thing. A mother's still going to cry for her son that dies in battle in ancient times as she does today. Things don't change that way. And it's unfortunately, they're always trying to manipulate and control people. And it does not work long term. I mean, if you suppress the population, you end up with lower economic growth. You had China and Russia both communists, but different. Stalin was very much was paranoid. All right, so I knew people that grew up in East Germany, and they were taught in school that the state is really your parent and not your biological parents. And if they ever said anything against the state, you should report them. Mm-hmm. Whereas in China, they didn't do that. China was more what you call the tall poppy syndrome. I don't care what you say to your wife, but you stick your head up above everybody else and start telling everybody else, it gets cut off. Mm-hmm. So they called it more the tall poppy syndrome. Whereas I had one friend in East Germany when the Berlin Wall fell. His father went and got his Stasi file, and he saw everybody he thought were friends were ratting on him.
Wow.
And he came home and started punching holes in the wall, pulling out microphones and stuff like this. At first, he said he thought his father was crazy. After that, he said his father would never speak to anybody but family. But that was the difference. Lenin initially, in creating his idea of the Soviet Union, was based upon the United States, that each republic would retain its sovereignty. And he even wrote a letter warning, do not let Stalin secede me. And Stalin is the one that was against that. Centralized, total control, everything brought to Moscow, etc. So that was the clash between the two of them. So the iron fist of Russian communists was substantially different than that of China.
Mm-hmm.
And was all pretty much based upon what you would say is the personality of Stalin.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. It's all very fascinating. I want to land the plane. Is there any final thoughts or anything you'd like to share with our audience? And then if there's any projects that you...
Pretty much, I would say that we're looking at increased geopolitical problems. I don't see the Middle East as being done. Things will probably start heating up as soon as August, going into September. And when war happens overseas like that, all right, the capital will come here. So, you'll still see the U.S. stock market make new highs, gold make new highs. The two will pretty much go in hand to some degree, because it's becoming more and more obvious that Europe is in serious trouble. And same thing with Britain. I had one friend just sent me the latest statistics on Britain. He said 53% of the people receive more money from Britain than they put in. So obviously there's going to be, but this is the socialistic problem. It brings down the economic growth and lowers the standard of living for everybody. And socialism doesn't help the people. It only helps create more of a bureaucracy. In ancient times, just the head in Athens, the head of the household voted, not women. They go, oh, that's hard. But you have to step back a minute. There wasn't anything they could do to you. All right, there wasn't these social programs. There wasn't income tax. When you started putting in these sorts of things, then everybody has the right to vote. That's really the major difference. So, I would say, strap in. It's going to get a little bit more volatile from August on. And just understand that as capital becomes concerned about Europe, Middle East, and even in Asia, it comes here. It will park in everything from, stocks, bonds, real estate, commodities. That's why some people call it the bull market of everything. I still get 2 to 3 phone calls a week. Gee, you want to sell your house? No. Where am I supposed to go? Chicago? No, thank you. So it's going to be interesting, but if you understand it from a capital flow perspective, You don't want to invest in Europe at all, because when that first bullet flies, they will put in capital controls, and that means you're not going to get money out. It was just going to be locked up there in a closet. That's it. Well, thank you for inviting me. Wish you the best over there.
What is a man? What has he got? If not himself, then there's not to say the words he truly feels, and not the words of one who is the record shows.